Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. We have a change of championship leader following the Mexican Grand Prix, but far from the only talking point of the day. Absolute chaos in the stewards room today. Multiple world champions frustrated with the decisions made during the course of the Grand Prix. A spectacular start for some of the drivers, a spectacular finish, robbed of us arguably by others. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, it's tough to put into words how much stuff we've got to get into today. We're going to start with a cost cap because the talking point is now from Sky Sports Italy, and yes, it's Sky Sports Italy, but it seems like all the journalists kind of know what the potential 2024 cost cap breach looks like, but, you know, there's some embargo or whatever. Sky Sports Italy have come out and said, apparently, that it could be McLaren and Mercedes. I would spend more time on this, but there is no time. This is the way the Grand Prix started. Verstappen, notably on the medium tyres. The only of the front runners to start on the mediums. It was kind of known based on the reconnaissance lap. The mediums didn't feel very good. The soft tyre was the preferred tyre today, kind of remarkably enough. A one-stop was possible. A two-stop was also very much viable. We'll get into that as the Grand Prix went on. Max started on mediums. This seemed to be an interesting decision because, look, could you go from 5th to 1st? Possibly, but unlikely in Mexico. But it was interesting to see both of the Red Bulls going down that route because, again, Tsunoda today was an absolute sacrificial lamb if that was what was required by the team, which is effectively what eventually happened. So the guys line up on the grid, a very long run down to turn 1. And we're probably not going to talk much about Norris today. There was plenty else going on. But, I mean, he did nothing wrong this weekend. He was absolutely perfect. It's difficult to really describe how much of a championship-like performance this weekend was from Lando. Purple, purple, purple every time it mattered in qualifying. It's so difficult to lead turn 1 in Mexico. He gets a great start, pulls over to the right-hand side, knows where the Ferraris are, they're going to battle. Of course, Max, as always, is right in the picture. I don't really know exactly what Max thought he was going to accomplish here, but he ends up going 4 wide with the Ferraris. Lando positions his car very nicely here. The two Ferraris are next to one another. Max finds himself on the outside, kind of squeezed out. He has a bit of a lock-up. And Leclerc, as well as Max, ends up off the track. So Hamilton, in a fair move, takes the position here on Leclerc. But when Hamilton and Norris get through the first chicane, he finds out that actually Charles Leclerc is now in the lead of the Grand Prix. Max Verstappen was also off the circuit here, also making his way back on. Now, this is a moment that isn't causing as much drama as some others today, but it's certainly worth a bit of talking points, right? Because Hamilton had the position coming out of the first corner on Leclerc. Lando was leading. Of course, Lando is leading this Grand Prix, kind of, although Leclerc has come back on track ahead because he cut over the grass. Hamilton had the position coming out of turn 2. Hamilton stayed on the track. Leclerc went off. It looked like it was Hamilton's position. Verstappen also went off the track and did yield positions back to his rivals, although George Russell even wanted more positions yielded. Then again, this is George Russell's car. This is Max Verstappen. And yeah, did he keep it on track going into the first corner? You might argue, Russell did try to argue, that because Max had left the track entirely, he should have given position back to Russell as well, because Russell qualified and started on the grid ahead. But the stewards didn't care about that. I don't mind them not caring about that. The big question really is this whole Ferrari thing, because, look, I'll just say it, right? If these two drivers were not on the same team, I'm sure the stewards would have looked at this. It seemed to me this is pretty blatant that Charles Leclerc took the position on Hamilton off the track. I mean, I don't know, maybe the stewards argued that Hamilton hadn't fully completed the overtake or something, but and maybe you could look at it that way. But I feel like this would at least have been investigated, right? Like if it was another team. And the team aren't going to care. Ferrari aren't going to care. It's like, well, our drivers are still where they started. But if these were different teams, I'm sure the stewards would have looked at it, you would have thought. But maybe not. So, Verstappen yields a couple of positions. As I say, this was Hamilton on Leclerc. To me, that move was basically done. It looked like Hamilton had it. But anyway, the steward didn't see it that way. So, Leclerc gives the place back to Lando. This is Verstappen giving the place a couple of places back as well. Not to Russell, though, notably enough. So all of a sudden, lap 3, Norris, Leclerc, Hamilton, Verstappen, Russell, Behrman. So Behrman with a great start, up to 6th. And, well, key driver to note. Piastri didn't have the greatest start. He was down in 9th off the early exchanges. And Hamilton was on the radio saying, look, I was ahead of Charles. What's going on? Why don't the stewards care? Of course, they could also tell Charles to yield, Ferrari, but what does that gain them, right? Nothing. So they were never going to do that. And Hamilton did have a bit of contact. I mean, first lap, there was actually a lot of contact. There was bumping over the curbs. Hamilton got a bit of front wing damage. I think he had a bit of floor damage as well as the race went on. So lap 2, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc. Now, look, at this point in the race, Max knows Lando's checking out front. If Max wants to win this championship, he has got to take matters into his own hands. And this is what Verstappen has... I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. Verstappen's highlight reel around Mexico the last 2 years is sensational. Like, I mean, not always good sensational, right? Some bad sensational in there as well. Now, Liam Lawson came into the pits. He had a front wing that got broken on the first lap. So there was all sorts going on. Again, this is another one. So Lawson comes out of the pits with his new front wing. Now... I mean, I don't know why I'm laughing at this, because this is actually shocking, and I don't think anyone's talked about this yet, and because there was so much else happening. But this is Lawson coming out of the pit lane, and as he comes through the first chicane, you can see here on the screen, there are 2 marshals running across the track. These are green flag conditions, by the way. Green flag conditions, I'm pretty sure anyway. I know there's a flashing panel there. But there's literally 2 guys running across the track right in front of Lawson. And Lawson on the radio was like, damn, I could have killed those guys. I mean, this needs serious investigation from the FIA, because this marshal came within about 2 meters or 1.5 meters of Lawson's car at potentially what could have been full racing speed. So no one's talking about that right now, but it will be talked about, I'm sure, in the coming days. Sonoda was ahead of Piastri, and this proved to be a bit of an issue. But let's talk about the major drama between Hamilton and Verstappen. So, look, these 2 rivals back at it again, and look, I think it was pretty great to watch. This was then the key moment of the way that everything happened, pretty much for the rest of the Grand Prix. So we'll come back to this image here in just a second. I want to take you through what happened. So, yeah, we don't get the first little bit of this, but Verstappen sent a big dive bomb down the inside of Hamilton. I think he was okay to go for the move, but as you can see, he bumps wheels with Hamilton, and Hamilton is forced fully off the track. So, did Verstappen cause a collision? Would this overtake have held up? No, I don't think it would have done. Verstappen, given on the entry of the corner, he was quite a way back. I don't think the stewards would have said he was entitled to racing room, and he certainly, I don't think, would have been able to just push Hamilton off the track and get away with it. So, in the spirit of good hard racing, Hamilton decided, I'm not having any of that. I'm coming back on the track and I'm pushing you off the track as well. This to me is like, look, it was an optimistic one for Max. Lewis was like, I'm going to give it right back to you. That's racing. As far as I'm concerned, this whole thing is just racing. Now, Max comes back on the track again. Of course, Hamilton probably expects Max to maybe yield the position, but of course it's Max, he doesn't. So then they're racing down into turn 4, and Hamilton has a bit more overspeed. Both of them go into the corner very hot. They both have a lock-up. Max locks up and ends up off the track as well. He leaves the track limit, which causes all the Bearman-related drama. Hamilton then locks up as well, trying to go around the outside. So, look, this is just racing. Now, the key point is, of course, that Hamilton does not take the newly created escape road. Now, it's a terribly designed escape road, really. Like, it doesn't feed out in a great way. It's incredibly tight and it has no grip at all. So the drivers would prefer just to go over the grass, which is what Hamilton eventually does. That's what causes a lot of this drama. So what Hamilton was eventually done for here was leaving the track and gaining an advantage. We can see on the run down into turn 4, he brakes late, gets around the outside of Max, but, you know, Hamilton overcooks it, right? At the end of the day, the stewards, in Hamilton's eyes, he felt like what happened at turn 1, turn 2 was a bit unfair, so he felt like this position was rightfully his. He then sends it round the outside to try and take the position on Max. He goes off the track, maybe also realising that Verstappen has also gone off the track and thinks, you know what, okay, that's fair enough, that's my position to take. Now, the stewards didn't see it that way, and I can understand why. I do think Hamilton has been kind of dealt a harsh hand here in the fact that nobody else got any action for anything, and Hamilton was penalised quite quickly, whereas Max was not penalised for anything at all. Now, of course, he should have taken the escape route here, and if he had have done, then he would have come back on position on track probably next to Max. They would have continued the fight, and it is what it is. But the fact that Hamilton then ended up coming out somewhat further ahead, as I say, the image that I was going to reshare for you guys in a second is here. Hamilton now finds himself with a couple second gap on Max. And because of this, the stewards determined that was leaving the track and getting an advantage. Personally, I can understand why they made that decision. I think Hamilton should have just taken the escape route, but I also think there is an argument that Ferrari should have told Lewis, right? I mean, why are Ferrari so incompetent? Because they had time, Ferrari, to go to Hamilton and say, okay, this is what we think about that. This is the way that we think the stewards are going to look at it. They could have told Hamilton, we think you should maybe back off a bit so you didn't gain as much of an advantage or maybe even yield. Now, of course, he wouldn't be able to yield position directly to Max because Behrman got in the way. And this was the critical next thing that happened. Now, I was so impressed by Ollie Behrman here. He was so opportunistic. I thought that Behrman might just be like, well, it's Max and Lewis, they're fighting it out, whatever. They can have their race. I'm going to stick to my nice solid P6 that I've managed to get myself into this position. But no, Behrman went full elbows out against the reigning world champion and muscles his way past Verstappen and up into fourth. So this was just great racing from Ollie. And look, you guys know that I'm a big fan of Ollie Behrman. I've said it before. Partly because he grew up not far from where I grew up, so there's a little bit of bias involved, but I've always rated Behrman since I started watching him a couple of years ago, and it's difficult to speak much more highly of what he is achieving right now, and certainly what he achieved today. So, the race continues. Hamilton in third, Behrman behind, Verstappen chasing. The two Mercedes, Antonelli got the jump on Russell, were all over the shop here. Piastri was still struggling to get past further back. The Drivers' Championship looked like there was going to be a new leader. Verstappen was really struggling for pace at this point, and it became clear that the tyre to be on was the soft tyre. It was the superior compound of the day. Then Hamilton gets his 10-second penalty. So I think what felt a little bit unfair about this is that I can understand why the penalty was given for Hamilton, but the Verstappen collision causing a collision turn 1 was looked at, no further action. They took a while to look at it. The Leclerc first lap incident, not even looked at, right? So it does feel a bit bad for Hamilton that it's like, okay, maybe you can understand the penalty. I at least can. But the fact that these other things weren't looked at feels a bit unfair, right? Hamilton says this is unbelievable, mate. Hamilton's tune rather changed as the race went on when he kind of thought, well, okay, maybe I could have done something different there. But again, I think the team should have probably told him what they thought about that. They had time to at least discuss it. And I just thought the whole, again, Ferrari communication, not the best. Hamilton, then no further action for Verstappen. He comes into the box, spends about half an hour in there. Hamilton's race was totally cooked. Now, this was lap 24, and already Verstappen is on the radio and he's hearing what the team are discussing. Is it a one-stop? Is it a two-stop? They go for the one-stop, and Max made it work so well, because at this point in the race, they are praying at Red Bull for a safety car. They absolutely send Tsunoda to the slaughterhouse and they let him be eaten alive by all the other guys who have boxed, just so he can try and hold them up a little bit. Tsunoda's race at this point was cooked, but he maybe helped Max a little bit try and extend that advantage on the one-stop strategy, especially if there was a safety car. Then it would have been a two-stop probably, but the safety car, of course, never arrived, and that left Max in a really tricky position. Hamilton also talked about why the other cars weren't getting penalties, right? There was so much else going on. I'm the one that gets a penalty. What's happening here? But look, there was also loads of drama going on at Mercedes. So the Mercedes guys, Antonelli was ahead. He was trying to get past Behrman, but it just wasn't happening. And as a result of that, Lando comes in for a stop at the same time. Again, Lando was in a totally different race today to the rest of the field. Hamilton was getting told, increase the lift and coast, increase the lift and coast. Hamilton says, I don't know if the tyres are going to make it. More lift and coast, please. That's what he was asked to do. So a nightmare again for the Ferrari drivers. Now, then Russell got on the radio and he told the team, look, I'm quicker than Antonelli. Let me pass. I'll give a go at Behrman. And if I don't, then I'll give the position back. Now, the problem with this whole situation, I think Mercedes kind of messed it up. I can understand why they did what they did. Eventually, they decided, Mercedes, to say, all right, George, through you go. Through you go. The radio was hilarious. George was getting increasingly frustrated, and I guess they felt that if they didn't let him through, he would just be so furious, he'd blow up the whole situation. So I get why they did it. The thing is, Russell wasn't happy because by the time they let him through, he'd cooked his tyres for a few laps. That was a fair assessment. But frankly, the Mercedes didn't have the pace anyway. Antonelli was quick this weekend. The Mercedes just didn't have the pace of the Haas. Can you believe it? Certainly not in the hands of Ollie Behrman today, who did a great job. So Russell could make no inroads either. But then it became relatively clear there were no inroads being made. So arguably, the team should have maybe swapped back, or they could have said, look, George, do your best maybe to keep Antonelli in DRS range. Now, to be fair, Antonelli kind of had it covered, but because George was pushing on, Antonelli dropped out of DRS. Now Piastri was a threat, and all of a sudden Mercedes turned a situation where they probably were able to hold Piastri back today to one where they now lost both positions at the end of the Grand Prix to Piastri. So in trying to get the podium, they squandered position to Oscar. Now part of that was this pit stop. They come into the box. Piastri knew they were going to undercut. Well, Mercedes knew that Piastri was going to try the undercut. That's what they tried to do. And, well, Antonelli comes into the box, has a 4.6 second stop. Mercedes cock it up, and Piastri is out in the lead. And that, of course, left at some point George Russell as a bit of a sitting duck. Even then, that George was a bit of a sitting duck, I still think he could have done a better job in his defence. Not a great day today for the Mercedes man. Just a quick word, I guess, on Sainz, because what an absolute nightmare that the Williams had today. His pit limiter wasn't working. He was bumping up and down in the pit lane. He got a penalty for that. Then he got another penalty for it. Comes into the pit lane, has to do a drive-through, still with the same issue. So the key point that was happening here, and the reason why I brought this screenshot up, was because Piastri had boxed, Antonelli had boxed, Russell boxed, and Haas decided that their best bet was to box as well and go for the two-stop. Now, this was a very interesting decision at the time, because Verstappen, after his one stop onto a soft, looked like he was going to be stuck behind all these guys until the end of the Grand Prix. They could have left Behrman out, hold third, and hope you hold off Max. We know now that that wouldn't have happened. The soft tyre was great. Max put in a mega stint at the end of this Grand Prix. Like, what Max did to even give himself a chance was unbelievable today. But arguably, we were, let's say, compromised with the final outcome that we could have had. So Max was catching Leclerc hand over fist at the end of this race. Brian Bozzi on the radio was telling Charles, more lift coast, more lift coast. And he was like, oh my God, I can hold off Max, but not when you're telling me like this. GP was giving him all the encouragement in the world. And it was honestly, yeah, Lando was going to win the Grand Prix, but this was a great stint to watch, right? Like, there was drama everywhere. Was Behrman going to get caught? Was Verstappen going to get Leclerc? This, I think Russell should have done a much better job defending this. I think he should have known that Piastri was going to send it down the inside. Like, fair play to Oscar. He made a couple of opportunistic moves today when needed. One on Ocon and one on Russell here. But again, the pace was absolutely nowhere near what Lando Norris was doing. As I said yesterday, or whenever I did the video, you know, if Piastri gets to P5, that's probably what I expected him to do, frankly, but still not quite good enough. Then Antonelli got the position back. He came on the radio and was like, look, George, you told me you give the place back. But after all these shenanigans, they now managed to lose both of the places to Piastri, which is not what they were trying to do. So Max was getting the encouragement, catching Leclerc, 8/10 a lap, 4/10 a lap, 8/10 a lap, and it looked like it was going to come down to the wire. Now, people always, I think, overestimate the chances of getting the overtake done because Max was pushing very hard. By the time he got to the end of the Grand Prix, his tyres were on life support. But to be fair, so was Charles Leclerc's. And once you get in the dirty air, it is difficult. But DRS is powerful around here, as we know. It's high downforce, so because it's so high altitude, right, because the air is thinner. So it does give you a pretty significant effect down the start-finish straight. Verstappen was within a couple of seconds. He was within a second, and then the yellow flag comes out. So Carlos Sainz's car pulls over at the final corner. So this is what happened to Sainz. The final stadium section, he actually gets on this curb and spins the car out. He hits the barriers with his rear of the car. The suspension is broken, and you can see how he's driving it sideways into safety. He pulls up here in the road, and it's basically out of the way. But the stewards decided that wasn't good enough. And they brought out the virtual set. They put out a yellow flag initially where Verstappen actually closed in. Then he had one final attempt, right? Piastri probably wasn't going to get Behrman, but this was such a finish to the race. Verstappen had literally one last go at getting Leclerc down the start-finish straight. And it looked like he was on course to do so. But then they brought out the virtual safety car so they could wheel. And look, as I've said earlier in the Grand Prix, we had marshals on track, right, with Liam Lawson nearly driving into them. So there is a reason why safety should be a priority in the sport, right? And if you need to get that car out of the way and make sure that Sainz can be safe, and you've got to wheel it out of the way, and that puts... I can understand it, right? Like, look, back in the day, you throw the double yellow, you get on with it. I can understand why they wanted to throw the VSC. It just it's just terrible timing, right, for the Grand Prix and for Max, because they throw the VSC for like half a lap, and then as soon as it ended, it just ended immediately. I don't know, it almost felt deliberate, right? It was like VSC ending, and then they ended it immediately, because the way that it works, and the way that I believe that it still works, but although I'm a little bit suspicious now, the idea is when the VSC goes to ending, when it ends is randomly generated. The drivers don't know if it's going to end in 2 seconds time or in 15 seconds time, right? They say that it's ending and then they just go green again. That's randomly decided, apparently, to my understanding. But it was maybe coincidental that as soon as the VSC went to ending, it was ended immediately. And it kind of felt like someone had pressed the button to say, okay, we at least want half a lap of racing here, like press the button, let them get on with it. We got that. The race didn't finish under safety car, but of course Max was not going to have a chance with half a lap to go around Mexico. Lando Norris wins the Grand Prix from Charles Leclerc 30 seconds down the rows. Max comes back in third. Behrman closed in on the final stint, understandably, on the two-stop strategy, holds off Piastri, then the two Mercedes. Hamilton came home in 8th place. Ocon and Bortoletto rounding out the points. Yeah, a remarkable race in so many ways. So obviously there were a lot of frustrations towards the FIA and the decision-making, right, for, from the Red Bull fans, from Max. Like, again, what I will say, Max, as he says after the Grand Prix, right, a few years ago, there was a notable incident with a Williams that caused a safety car. That worked out for Max on that occasion. This time, it didn't, right? So, as he says, it is what it is. The key point is, though, he tried hard. Behrman was the driver of the day, deserves a lot of credit, but this is the way the championship looks. Lando Norris retakes the lead of the championship, I think for the first time since, Saudi Arabia. He now leads on 357. Piastri a singular point behind on 356. Verstappen at 321. It's a 36 points gap now between Norris and Verstappen with 4 rounds to go. Could Piastri still win this title? Absolutely. But right now there is only one championship favourite. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. I guess my hot take of the day is that I actually totally understand what the stewards decided in both controversial incidents. I just think there were very much other controversial incidents in both categories, VSC and leaving the track and getting an advantage decision making, that weren't looked at as they should have been. So intrigued to your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.